welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating and, frankly, incredibly esoteric topic. We're going to unpack the channeled spiritual messages of the ancient figure, Zoroaster. Now, we're looking at a highly unique source text here, one that offers a completely unorthodox lens on cosmic history, human reincarnation, and the unseen spiritual battles that supposedly shape our entire world. It's a wild journey stretching all the way from forgotten ancient continents right up to prophecies about our modern geopolitical landscape. So, let's get into it. Just to lay the groundwork and establish our source material impartially, we are examining texts authored by Ryuho Okawa. These books present channeled spiritual messages from beings like Zoroaster and Maitreya. What we're doing today is simply breaking down the specific and deeply esoteric worldview offered inside these pages. They lay out an alternative spiritual history of the cosmos, along with some very distinct commentary on global religions. Whether you approach this as literal truth, really interesting mythology, or just a fascinating sociological phenomenon, the system of thought here is incredibly structured. It's an intense thought experiment that challenges how we typically view historical timelines and the unseen forces out there. All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the core of Zoroastrianism. Second, Eskrent and Mani. Third, the genealogy of light and dark. Fourth, views on modern religions. And finally, number 5, the reincarnation plan for China. Section 1. The core of Zoroastrianism, dualism, and the afterlife. To understand where this is all going, we really have to rewind to the ancient past. The source tells us that the absolute heart of Zoroaster's teachings boils down to one concept: the dualism of good and evil. And in this text, we're not just talking about a vague philosophical idea. It's presented as a literal, massive cosmic clash between two opposing forces. On one side, you have the god of light, Ahura Mazda. On the exact opposite side is the devil of darkness, known as Ahriman. The core teaching was essentially a stark, binary choice for humanity. Believe in the god of light, and whatever you do, don't let Ahriman drag you down into hell. And this intense, stark choice, it carries right over into their concept of the afterlife. The channeled Zoroaster gives us this incredibly vivid and honestly terrifying image of the afterlife judgment. He describes it as a broad sword spanning a deep ravine. Think of it as a bridge that the deceased absolutely have to cross. It serves a very similar conceptual purpose to the Sanzu River in Japanese Buddhist tradition, or the river Styx in Greek mythology. So how does this sword bridge actually work? Well, it's pretty wild. For good souls who lived righteous lives, the broad blade magically turns flat, giving them a completely safe and easy passage straight across the ravine and into heaven. But for evil souls, the blade flips so the razor-sharp edge is facing straight up. They can't cross. Their spiritual bodies are literally split, and they plummet down into the dark valley of hell. The text suggests that these super-physical, highly vivid depictions of judgment were intentionally paired with their earthly customs, like sky burials, to firmly teach ancient people how to completely detach from their physical bodies. Section 2. Eskrent and Mani, a cosmic timeline. Now, the text expands this narrative way beyond just one ancient lifetime. In fact, it claims this single soul incarnated at several huge, pivotal moments in planetary history. We're talking about jumping back an incredible 20,000 years to the legendary Mu continent, where he allegedly lived as a great saint named Eskrent. Millennia later, he shows up in the Middle East as Zoroaster. And then, jumping forward to the 3rd century AD, he reincarnates again as the religious unifier Mani. Okay, let's talk about that ancient Mu era for a second, because the details here are absolutely fascinating. As Eskrent, the text claims he initiated the very first customs of bowing to worship the sun, essentially bringing a religion of light to humanity way back then. But it goes further. It provocatively states that he practically applied what it calls pyramid power, and, get this, claims that the specific knowledge was directly taught to humanity by several species of extraterrestrials who were actively visiting the Mu continent at the time. Fast-forwarding a few millennia to his 3rd century reincarnation as Mani, the text outlines a really noble but ultimately heartbreaking endeavor. As Mani, he tried to pull off something incredibly ambitious, creating a unified world religion that blended the very best parts of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. But as you might guess, the world just wasn't ready. He faced brutal persecution from both Orthodox Zoroastrians and the increasingly politicized Christian church of that era. His attempt at spiritual unification ended in a gruesome execution. It really highlights this dark, recurring theme in the text: the cosmic reformer constantly facing violent pushback from established orthodoxy. Section 3. Genealogy of Light and Dark, the Cosmic Players. To make sense of all these earthly tragedies, the channeled text maps out a massive spiritual family tree. The text explicitly maps out exactly who is who in this ongoing cosmic war. It clarifies that the god of light, Ahura Mazda, is actually a manifestation of El Cantare, which is the supreme spiritual entity in this specific belief system. Meanwhile, on the dark side of things, the devil of darkness, Ahriman, is identified as the devil Belial, historically known as Baal. And here's the crucial detail. The text identifies Belial as the son of another incredibly powerful entity named Enlil. The channel text places some heavy blame squarely on this Enlil lineage. It characterizes Enlil and his son Belial as gods rooted in fear, punishment, and curses. According to Zoroaster's channeled message, it was this specific dark lineage that infiltrated and totally confused the Middle Eastern concept of God, blending light and darkness together to create a highly punitive theology. Zoroaster strongly pushes back against Enlil's idea that humanity fundamentally must be punished. Instead, his perspective is framed as being much closer to Buddhism. He simply wants people to return to their natural, right state of mind, without all this need for vengeful cosmic retribution. Section 4. Views on Modern Religions, Observing the Present. So, what does this channeled spirit think about the world today? Let's take a look. The commentary on modern global faiths is pretty balanced, but definitely critical. When looking at Islam, the channeled Zoroaster praises the faith for keeping a very strong grip on its spiritual aspects and maintaining an acute awareness of the spirit world. He also notes its historical success in uniting religion and politics as a really unique civilizational experiment, though he does mention that certain practices feel outdated in the modern era. On the flip side, when observing Christianity, he notes that while it has driven incredible secular, scientific, and economic progress, he criticizes it for having lost so much of its original, mystical, spiritual essence over the centuries. Which brings us to a huge question. Having observed all the successes and failures of his past lives, and having critiqued the current state of world religions, where does a cosmic reformer look when evaluating the Earth right now? Where exactly is the focal point of today's global struggle? Section 5. Reincarnation Plan for China, the Secret Doctrine. This brings us right to the climax of the explainer. According to the source, the spirit of Zoroaster views modern China as the absolute greatest single problem in the world today. The text makes the argument that applying external political or economic pressure just isn't enough to break or change the rigid system there. Because of this, a secret doctrine is unveiled, a deliberate, strategic plan to reincarnate directly within China in the future. The goal isn't to conquer from the outside, but to be born as a citizen, spread spiritual truth from the inside out, and transform the entire system internally. Talk about an inside job, right? And that leaves us with a truly profound final thought to chew on. We've seen the tragedy of money, executed for trying to bring spiritual truth to a world that violently rejected him. So as we look at these esoteric prophecies of a future reformer planning to incarnate in one of the world's most restrictive systems, if a cosmic figure like that were born today, would our modern world even recognize their message? Or are we destined once again to just repeat the tragedies of our ancient past? It's a super compelling question derived from a really unique source text. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so have you ever wondered what ties together ancient explorers, cosmic extraterrestrial warnings, and, of all things, modern gender roles? Well, today we are unpacking the highly detailed and, frankly, deeply esoteric spiritual cosmology presented in Chapter 2 of Ryuho Okawa's published Spiritual Messages. We're going to systematically break down a really fascinating text that bridges ancient history, cosmic dimensions, and our modern social struggles. I know, it sounds like a completely wild mix of topics, right? But let's dive right into this intriguing question by examining the text's unique perspective on Earth's spiritual history and its current rapid societal transitions. As we navigate these concepts together, you'll see exactly how the source material weaves these seemingly totally disconnected threads into a single, unified cosmic narrative. We're pulling our insights straight from this specific source text, a book titled The Descent of Zoroaster in Maitreya. Now, just to be clear, our goal here isn't to validate or debunk any of this. We are focusing entirely on the channeled claims and the intricate structural cosmology presented within its pages. We're just going to map out exactly what the text says so you can understand the architecture of this belief system for yourself. To help us navigate all these claims, we'll follow a quick roadmap. First, the prism of light. Then, past reincarnations unveiled, reinterpreting Buddhist scriptures, the extraterrestrial warning, and finally, the Earth's experimental era.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the prism of light.
Let's start at the highest macro level described in the text, the cosmic identity of the entity identified as Maitreya. The text defines Maitreya not as your standard human soul, but as a highly elevated ninth-dimensional being. And the crucial takeaway here is that Maitreya's primary mission is to act as this literal prism of light. Imagine an actual glass prism taking pure, blinding white light, which is identified here as the supreme light of Lord Alcantara, and diffracting it into specific, usable colors. These different colors are then brought down to different eras and regions, effectively creating the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the times for humanity. What's truly fascinating here is how Maitreya is actually characterized. The text describes this entity as androgynous and non-individualized. Imagine trying to influence human history without any personal bias or ego getting in your way. Actually, that lack of a rigid personality is framed as a strict functional requirement. It allows the entity to impartially shape the spirit of different eras without a personal agenda interfering. It's a remarkably utility-driven view of spiritual existence. Moving right along to section 2, past reincarnations unveiled. So, moving from that cosmic ninth-dimensional view down to Earth's actual historical timeline, the text outlines several specific past lives where this prism of light supposedly took human form. And wow, the historical resume is incredibly diverse. The claims start with the ancient founder of Mithraism, jump forward to the 15th century explorer Christopher Columbus, and then land in the modern era with Helena Blavatsky, the famous founder of Theosophy who was known for exploring the spiritual world. Now you're probably wondering, what do those vastly different figures even have in common? Well, within this cosmology, these varied incarnations weren't chosen for royalty, comfort, or prestige. Far from it. The entity tends to be born as individuals who wield the absolute precise type of influence required to push their respective eras forward. Whether that's discovering a new continent to connect the globe, or founding a spiritual movement to shift public consciousness, the incarnation is treated as a strategic deployment. It's all about advancing the spirit of the times. That brings us to section 3, reinterpreting Buddhist scriptures. Here, the source material does something pretty bold. It explicitly addresses and corrects certain long-standing historical narratives found within traditional Buddhist texts. Traditional scriptures often claim that deities like Brahma or Indra, who are referred to here as Taishakutin, directly guided Gautama Siddhartha. However, this text asserts that is a major historical misunderstanding. It corrects the narrative, stating that these deities are actually just aspects or assistants working under the supreme deity El Cantare. Furthermore, the entity speaking in the text explicitly expresses doubt that it directly guided Gautama in the way ancient scriptures claim, so it's a fundamental restructuring of the traditional spiritual hierarchy. Okay, let's pivot to section 4, the extraterrestrial warning. The narrative takes a massive shift right here. We are moving away from earthly religious history and looking straight up at the stars, linking Earth's current geopolitical tensions to ancient galactic histories. The text delivers a stark, chilling warning by referencing the Orion civilization. It outright claims that Orion was completely annihilated by nuclear warfare. The source presents this not just as some fun cosmic trivia, but as a direct, urgent cautionary tale. It's a catastrophic, civilization-ending fate that extraterrestrial observers desperately want Earth to avoid at all costs. Because of this deep fear of nuclear destruction, the source claims Earth is basically under a microscope. It states that extraterrestrial groups actively intervene during major global crises. But they don't just land in flying saucers on the White House lawn. The interventions purportedly occur via subtle spiritual methods. They use wanderers, which are alien souls born into human bodies, and walk-ins, where an entity takes over a willing human host. The text notes that this exact type of intervention previously happened during the ancient mythological era of Mu, and it says it is happening again right now to steer us away from the fate of Orion. And finally, section 5, the Earth's experimental era. Let's see how this grand cosmic overview builds into a very specific analysis of modern human society. The text views our current timeline as a totally unique experimental period. The argument is that in past eras, society was defined by physical power, swords, spears, and a very male-dominated hierarchy. But our modern era, it has completely shifted to intellectual power. The rise of computers, technology, and information has effectively erased that traditional physical power gap between men and women.
The text sees this modern rise in fluid gender roles and equality not just as a cultural movement, but as a deliberate, spiritual experiment in human evolution.
So, how are followers of happy science supposed to navigate this highly fluid experimental era? The text provides some very specific marching orders. It asserts that simply talking about spirituality isn't going to cut it anymore. Demonstrating actual phenomena, like psychic abilities, is deemed an absolutely necessary and sufficient condition to prove spiritual truths to a skeptical modern world. To overcome the mainstream dismissal of the spiritual, followers are advised to courageously and rapidly expand their movement, without fearing social persecution. Crucially, it dictates that to become a true world religion, they've got to pair internationally accepted logical reasoning with profound, unshakable faith. As we wrap up this explainer, the source leaves us with a massive, profound framework to consider. It literally connects the ninth dimension, historical figures like Columbus, extraterrestrial warnings, and modern gender equality into one giant system. If our current societal evolution, with all its rapid technological leaps and shifting cultural norms, is indeed a planned spiritual experiment directed by a cosmic prism of light, well, what will the final result look like for humanity? It is definitely a fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.